Bruno! Bruno Jenkins? I should be sad. I should feel desperate. I mean, I've never dreamed of being a mouse, like, say, a film star. But now that I am one, I'm starting to see the advantages. I know mice sometimes get poisoned or caught in traps, but boys sometimes get killed too. Run over or get some awful illness. Boys have to go to school. Mice don't. Mice don't have to pass exams. When mice grow older, they don't have to go out to work. It's no bad thing to be a mouse. I'm as free as William and Mary. Hope they're doing all right. Hello, Bruno. What have you got there? An ancient fish paste sandwich? Pretty good, a bit pongy. Now listen, Bruno. Now that we're both mice, I think we ought to start thinking about the future. But you're a mouse too, Bruno. Look at your paws. Don't be silly, Bruno. There are worse things than being a mouse. You can live in a hole. You can creep into the larder at night and nibble through all the packets of biscuits and cornflakes and stuff. You can stuff yourself silly. Maybe your rich father will get you a special little mouse fridge all to yourself, one you can open. We'll go and see my grandmother. She'll understand. She knows all about witches. The witches who turned us into mice. The grandpa witch gave you a chocolate, remember, Bruno? Follow me to grandmother's room. Down the corridor, run like mad, no talking, and don't let anyone catch you. Don't forget that anyone who catches you will try to kill you. Come on.
The next evening, after my grandmother had given me a bath, she once again took me into the living room for another story. Tonight, the old woman said, I am going to tell you how to recognize a real witch when you see one. Can you always be sure? I asked. No, she said, you can't, and that's the trouble. But you can make a pretty good guess. She was dropping cigar ash all over her lap. I had hoped she wasn't going to catch on fire before she told me how to recognize a witch. In the first place, she said, a real witch is certain to be wearing gloves when you meet her. Surely not always, I said. What about in the summer, when it's hot? Even in the summer, she has to. Do you want to know why? Why, I asked. Because she doesn't have fingernails. Instead of fingernails, she has thin, curvy claws, like a cat. Mind you, lots of very respectful women wear gloves, especially in the winter. Mama used to wear gloves, I said. Not in their house, my grandmother said. Witches wear gloves even in their house. They only take them off before they go to bed. How do you know all this, Grandmama? Don't interrupt, she said. Now, the second thing to remember is that a real witch is always bald.
Bald, I said. Bald as a boiled egg, my grandmother said. I was shocked. There was something indecent about a bald woman. Why are they bald, Grandmama? Don't ask me why, she snapped. But you can take it from me that not a single hair grows on a witch's head. How horrid! Disgusting, my grandmother said. If she's bald, she'll be easy to spot. Won't she? Not at all, my grandmother said. A real witch always wears a wig, and a first-class wig. It's almost impossible to tell a really first-class wig from real hair. Not unless you give it to pull to see if it comes off. Then that's what I'll have to do, I said. Don't be foolish. You can't go around pulling up the hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just you try it and see what happens. So that doesn't help much either, I said.
What other things must I look for to recognise a witch? I asked. Look for the nose holes, my grandmother said. Witches have slightly larger nose holes than ordinary people. The rim of each nose hole is pink and curvy, like the rim of a certain kind of seashell. Why do they have such big nose holes? I asked. For smelling with, my grandmother said. Witches have the most amazing power to smell. In fact, they can smell a child who's on the other side of the road on a pitch black night. But you can't smell me, I said. I've just had a bath. Oh yes, you could, my grandmother said. The more clean you happen to be, the more smelly you are to a witch.
Now wait a minute, Grandmama. Don't interrupt, she said. The point is this. When you haven't washed for a week and your skin is all covered over with dirt, then quite obviously the stink waves cannot come oozing out nearly so strongly. I shall never have a bath again, I said. Just don't have one too often, my grandmother said. Once a month is quite often enough for a sensible child. It was at times like these I loved my grandmother more than ever. Grandmama, I said, if it's a dark night, how can a witch smell the difference between a child and a grown-up? Because grown-ups don't give out stink waves, she said. Only children do that. But I don't really give out stink waves, do I? I'm not giving them out at this very moment. Am I? Not to me, you aren't, my grandmother said. To me, you were smelling like raspberries and cream. But to a witch, you'd be smelling absolutely disgusting. What would I be smelling of? I asked. Dog's droppings, my grandmother said. I reeled. I was stunned. Dog's droppings? I cried. I am not smelling of dog's droppings. I don't believe it. I won't believe it. What's more, my grandmother said, speaking with a touch of relish, to a witch, you'd be smelling of fresh dog's droppings. That simply is not true, I said. I'm not smelling of dog's droppings, stale or fresh. There is no point in arguing about it, my grandmother said. It's simply a fact of life.
I was outraged. I simply could not believe what my grandmother was telling me. So if you see a woman holding her nose as she passes you in the street, she went on, that woman could easily be a witch. I decided to change the subject. Tell me what else to look for in a witch, I said. The eyes, my grandmother said. Look very carefully at the eyes, because the eyes of a real witch are different from yours and mine. Look in the middle of the eye, where there is normally a little black dot. If she is a witch, the black dot will keep changing colours, and you will see fire and you will see ice dancing in the very centre of the coloured dot. It will send shivers running all over your skin. My grandmother leant back in her chair and sucked away contentedly at a foul black cigar. I squatted on the floor, staring up at her, fascinated. She was not smiling. She looked deadly serious. Are there other things? I asked her. Of course there are other things, my grandmother said. You don't seem to understand that witches are not actually women at all. They look like women. They talk like women, and they are able to act like women. But in actual fact, they are totally different animals. They are demons in human shape. That is why they have claws and bald heads and queer noses and peculiar eyes, all of which they have to conceal as best as they can from the rest of the world.
What else is different about them, Grandmama? The feet, she said. Witches never have toes. No toes, I cried. Then what do they have? They just have feet. The feet have square ends with no toes on them at all. Does that make it difficult to walk? I asked. Not at all, my grandmother said, though it does give them a problem with their shoes. All ladies like to wear small, rather pointed shoes. But a witch, whose feet are very wide and square, has the most awful job of squeezing her feet into those neat little pointed shoes.
If she's wearing ordinary shoes, it won't help me to recognise her, will it, Grandmama? I'm afraid not, she said. You might see her limping, very slightly, but only if you were watching closely. Are those the only differences then, Grandmama? There's one more, she said. Just one more. What is it, Grandmama? The spit is blue. Blue, I cried. Not blue. The spit can't be blue. Blue as a bilberry, she said. No, you don't mean it. Nobody can have blue spit. Witches can, she said. Is it like ink, I asked. Exactly, she said. They even use it to write with. They use those old-fashioned pens with nibs on and simply lick the nib. But can't you notice the blue spit, Grandmama? If a witch was talking to me, would I be able to notice it? Only if you were looking closely. If you were looking very carefully, you would probably see a slight bluish tinge on their teeth, but it doesn't show much. It would if they spat, I said. Witches never spit, my grandmother said. They daren't. I couldn't believe my grandmother would be lying to me. She went to church every morning of the week, and she said grace before every meal, and somebody who did that would never tell lies. I was beginning to believe every word she spoke. So there you are, my grandmother said. That's about all I can tell you. None of it is very helpful. You can still never be absolutely sure whether a woman is a witch or not just by looking at her. But if she is wearing the gloves, if she has the large nose holes, the queer eyes and the hair that looks as though it might be a wig, and if she has a bluish tinge on her teeth, if she has all of these things, then you run like mad.
Dear Mr. Willy Wonka, ever since you handed the factory down to me, I've wanted to write you a thank you letter and to ask how your retirement is going. I've been ever so busy, I've hardly had a chance to sit down. That is why lockdown has been the perfect opportunity to write and assure you that the factory is everything I ever dreamed of and more. I've been keeping in contact with the 4 other children from the factory tour. I even had them visit the factory before social distancing was in place. Don't worry, I was careful to keep Augustus Gloop away from the chocolate river, with the help of some Oompa Loompas. We had a Zoom call last Tuesday, and he said he's really enjoying the Eat Out to Help Out scheme. His mother said he's the only reason Subway is still in business. Violet Beauregard, although she's still purple in the face, is back to her normal size. She's stopped the chewing gum obsession now. I think. She was wearing a mask on our last Zoom call. I expect she's traumatized from blowing up like a blueberry. Well, if one good thing has come from all this, it's given her an excuse to cover up her bright purple face. I feel so lucky to call the factory my home. I can't imagine how it would have been to have lockdown in my old house. Veruca Salt kept telling me how desperate she was to travel abroad. I think she should be grateful that she has such a large estate. Some people aren't so fortunate, and that's okay, because all you really need is patience. It'll be over before we know it. Oh, and also, Veruca told me she now has an intense fear of squirrels. Serves her right for being such a bad nut. And that brings me to Mike TV. Nothing much has changed for him, although instead of watching Western action films all day, he tunes into the daily announcements. Living through a pandemic is like a real-life video game to him. As for me and my family, we've been selling edible toilet paper. Only kidding, we're doing chocolate bar door service. We go to people's doors and leave goodies on the porch. Of course, we hand sanitize before and after. It's just something to lift people's spirits, to get them through. The chocolate is definitely getting me through. I've left a Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight enclosed in this envelope. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did when I won the golden ticket. I hope you can visit soon. I'm sure this will all be over before we know it. Yours sincerely, Charlie Bucket. P.S. I'm working on a triple chocolate, caramel flavoured vaccine. I'll keep them away from Augustus.